Hello and welcome to this Serial Geek TV episode commentary for Venkman's Ghost Repellers, an episode of The Real Ghostbusters produced by Geek. My goodness, this episode, it got a lot of play in my house. It was watched over and over again because it was released on VHS. And so, like so many of those episodes from a variety of cartoons that were released on VHS, you know it off by heart. I think that's the case for a lot of the cartoons released on VHS back in the day. We can all recite certain episodes better than others. We know the story beats, the points, certain pieces of dialogue, and that's very much the case with Venkman's Ghost Repellers. Richard Mueller, the writer of this episode, what a great guy. What a great writer for The Real Ghostbusters. One of the best, alongside Straczynski and Michael Reeves. Those guys just did such great work with this series. Mueller was just one of those writers you could rely on to pen a fantastic episode with fantastic character work. And Venkman's Ghost Repellers is a fine example of that. I had the honour of meeting Richard Mueller and working with him during the production of the Time Life DVD box set for The Real Ghostbusters. During that production, alongside Andy Mangles, I would meet those that we were interviewing, those that worked on the show, numerous big names. So many talented people came into the building to be interviewed over the course of a week. It was such a wonderful experience. Richard Mueller and I got on so well. It was in the schedule that we would do an episode commentary together, and this was the very episode we chose to do an episode commentary on. So we sat there with very little preparation and waxed lyrical and managed to do a fairly decent episode commentary, and it was a pleasure. He and I just bounced off one another really well. I mean, when you've got the writer of the episode sat next to you and you can say, what was this all about? He was elaborating on so many things that at that point I had no knowledge of. So yeah, I may pull a fact or two from that commentary. Richard Mueller was actually with the Coast Guard for a number of years, located off the Pacific coast. That's what inspired the very premise for this episode. And here's one of those wonderful conversations between two clearly defined characters in this series. Just listen to Peter Venkman and Ray Stantz converse here.
This brings to 7 the total of ships that have vanished in that area since 1980.
Hey, Peter!
What?
Another ship's been lost in the New Jersey parallelogram.
So?
So we should go out there, clean that place up.
Ray, who lives there?
No one. It's in the ocean.
Then who's going to pay us?
I thought it'd be nice.
I love that conversation because within the space of 10 seconds, even if you'd never seen an episode before, you know who these characters are. And it's a wonderful reflection of their movie counterparts. You can almost imagine Bill Murray and Dan Aykroyd delivering this dialogue in live action. And that's what the really talented writers of The Real Ghostbusters did. They were able to make you believe that these characters were the same as the movie ones. If you look at later seasons of The Real Ghostbusters, the characters really don't feel the same. They feel very much removed from what we come to know and love. The animation in this episode is very unique. It doesn't appear that this studio or this specific team of animators did any other episode of the series. There are moments when it actually has stylings of the work that Toei Doga would do for their Marvel Productions cartoons, but it's definitely not Toei Doga, he says, fingers crossed. Hopefully in time we can figure out who animated this episode and numerous others of The Real Ghostbusters. Myself and a few others have been collecting layout artwork from the show over the years, as many Japanese studios had their name on the layout artwork, so we are slowly getting there as to identifying the studios. But it's probably still going to be a long time before we get to the bottom of who animated what. But for example, going through certain pieces of layout and thinking, oh my goodness, the best Japanese studio of the 1980s, Tokyo Movie Shinsha, worked on this episode of The Real Ghostbusters, or that episode of The Real Ghostbusters. I'd love to find out what studio worked on this episode. And like I say, one day we will. It always makes me chuckle how the Ghost Repeller is nothing more than a poncho, and as Slimer demonstrates, it is utterly useless. And yeah, we meet Peter's father, who actually appears 3 times in this series. This episode, another Richard Mueller penned episode, Cold Cash and Hot Water, which is a truly fantastic episode, and a sequel to this episode of sorts, and The Treasure of Sierra Tamale, written by Richard Mueller once again. So Richard Mueller was the writer to introduce this character, and there's a reason for that. I love the way Peter's father is designed to look just like a con man should look. The old checkered jacket, the bow tie. He's supposed to look like you could never trust this guy. One other thing about Peter's father in his design is that he has individual teeth, and you're probably thinking, what? But often in animation, when individual teeth are drawn on a character, it means they're a villain. And here it's used on Peter's father to kind of push forward that do not trust this guy. He may not be a villain, but he's not far off from being nefarious. Maybe that's too strong a word, I don't know. But yeah, and I love the way that Peter's father is written. Even this scene is really sweet. It just shows that dynamic between them, that kind of broken family. In other episodes, Peter mentions that his father was never around much, and you get that sense with this scene that it's just it's not a father and son, you know. Everything his father says is almost a sales pitch, and we get with this scene his father basically selling the Ghostbusters on the idea, please endorse my ghost repellers. And the fact that the way he words it, I'm just trying to make the world a better place, like you guys, you know. And he just basically guilt trips Peter, and it's so well done. Also, I've got to say, Peter with his top off looks incredibly buff. I think it's fair to say that Bill Murray wasn't really that well defined. So yeah, I mentioned Richard Mueller having a connection to the movie prior to the cartoon. Richard Mueller wrote the rather fantastic novelization to the movie, and in that very novel he expanded the events of the movie, introducing some of the Ghostbusters' relatives. Aunt Lois was in the novelization, and she would appear in the episode The Spirit of Aunt Lois, another wonderful script penned by Richard Mueller. Also, Peter's father, the con man, was referenced in that very book. Thus, Richard Mueller already had a handle on the character. He knew in his mind who Peter's father was, who Ray's aunt was, Aunt Lois. So when he was coming up with ideas from the show, he already had these established characters in his mind. J. Michael Straczynski, who was the head writer for this show, hired Richard Mueller because of his work on the novelization, demonstrating that those in charge of the show were taking the writers they hired very seriously. This truck driver, he actually shows up again in Sea Fright, same character model, and it could be argued that it's actually the same character, a truck driver that works by the docks. I think it's just one of those happy coincidences where they reuse the character model, but heck, I like the idea that it could be the same character. I should mention that Lorenzo Music rarely voiced many other characters in the series, but he actually voices Peter's father. He gives him a rather gravelly voice. There was a time, a long time ago, when I really wasn't too keen on the voice, but the more I've watched this episode over the years, the more I like it. It's a nice connection to have the pair share the same voice actor. And bloody hell, Lorenzo Music was just fantastic at everything he did anyway. I mean, I will never ever forgive Deke or those in charge, whoever it was, for removing him and Laura Summer from the series. You know, that was my Peter Venkman and my Janine Melnitz. When they left, I find the show incredibly hard to watch beyond that. And that's no disrespect to Dave Coulier or Kath Soucie. Both are very talented voice actors, but when you've established 78 episodes with a particular voice cast with great chemistry, it's really hard to suddenly transition into a very different cast. And yeah, eventually Arsenio Hall would even be replaced by the super talented Buster Jones, but again, it's just that when you know the voices in your head and they all suddenly changed, I like the captain with his Harvard Lockjaw voice. It's that kind of voice, dear boy. A voice that does pop up in quite a few 1980s cartoons, based, of course, on the voice of the late, great Jim Brackus. There's a two-shot coming up, and again, I'll always think of Toei Doga's animation style when I see it, rendered with such detail and a certain rawness to it. And we're back at the firehouse. I love this scene with Peter, Ray and the captain. It's a wonderfully written and acted conversation. You get a real sense of who these people are. The captain talks about the incident, which clearly intrigues Peter and excites Ray, because Ray is fascinated with all things spiritual and the unknown. And again, it just shows that dynamic between the characters. Peter is, arms folded. Ray is clapping excitedly.
We would like you men to go in and bring them out. We'll pay any reasonable fee.
Wow!
Why us, Captain? Doesn't the Coast Guard find lost ships?
The last radio message...
Peter is obviously apprehensive and begins to try and avoid the job, turning the conversation, surely this is a job for the Coast Guard and, not the Ghostbusters, until the captain utters those two words, holds up his fingers and says,
"You, Ghost Repellers."
I love Peter's reaction. He knows that his father has put him in a position that could affect the reputation of the Ghostbusters, and so he and his team must go into action. The Coast Guard, I'm sure, could prosecute Peter Venkman due to the old ghost repellers. It's so funny when you look at this series, because just these conversations, they're not conversations that children would understand. I mean, I'm sure at the time I remember enjoying the visuals of the show and the writing, but not the characters talking about fraudulent advertising. That kind of thing would go over a child's head. So yeah, the genius of this show was that the writers were writing for themselves and hoping that they would appeal to a younger audience to enjoy the ghost busting. I mean, the movie itself, let's be honest, the live action movie is not a kid's movie. I mean, there's one scene, and I think we all know what it is, that is clearly not supposed to be in a kid's movie. And the truth of it is, Ghostbusters was a film phenomenon that captivated an audience from the very youngest to the very oldest, and that's the beauty of it. And the cartoon should primarily do the same. Many will dismiss it because it's a cartoon, so therefore it's for kids. But those writing this show, they were doing so much more. And here we are, the Ghostbusters are on their way to the New Jersey parallelogram. And be sure to pay close attention to the way the energy is animated in the upcoming shots. It's beautiful. There's such dynamic movement to it. An example of Japanese animation at its finest. It doesn't just emerge, it has a life to its own. That's a classic example of great Japanese animation.
Nuts.
I love that ending. What an end to Act 1. So, as I may have explained before, when I met Marsha Goodman, who was the voice director for the show, she gave me all the call sheets for the series. The call sheets basically listed the day of an episode's voice recording session and who was involved. This was great, as it allowed me to see all the uncredited voice work on the series, because there's a lot of uncredited voice work on this series. But from the call sheet relating to Venkman's Ghost Repellers, I can tell you that this episode was recorded on the 3rd of July 1986. And here's the trippy thing. Frank Welker, the voice of Ray and Slimer, recorded his dialogue the day before on the 2nd of July, probably because, knowing Frank Welker, he was busy doing 3,000 other shows at the time. It's rather amazing then that there's this chemistry you can feel with the characters in this episode, as with many other episodes, and yet Frank Welker isn't even in the same room. I mentioned the earlier conversations between Peter and Ray, they feel very natural, yet Frank Welker isn't in the same room as Lorenzo Music. It's an inspired piece of writing here, with Egon reversing the polarity of the PKE meter. With everything being ectoplasmic energy in this dimension, the PKE meter now works in reverse and only picks up signs of life. Thus, the Ghostbusters can track down the missing ship and the people on board by using the PKE meter. And this dimension they're in, it's so wonderfully rendered and very atmospheric. You have these beautiful vistas of nothingness, almost purple and blues and yellows, to create this ethereal nothing. And that is accompanied by this wonderful haunting hum from this dimension, like a weird undercurrent of sound that just lends itself to this uneasiness from this dimension. And it's about to get a whole lot weirder, as we're about to see. This episode takes place off the coast of New Jersey, this being the New Jersey parallelogram, which, if you didn't clock, is a riff on the Bermuda Triangle. It's a great little gag. I almost feel like the episode should have been called the New Jersey parallelogram, not as striking as Venkman's Ghost Repellers, but the New Jersey parallelogram I think is such a funny name. The funny thing about the New Jersey reference is that it was always something that would catch my ear in the Real Ghostbusters and a few other cartoons of the time that took place on Earth. And Richard told me the story that New Jersey is an old showbiz joke, primarily from Saturday Night Live. It was always like the go-to point or the punchline for a gag. I think Ghosts Are Us, the pilot episode of the series, is the first time you hear a New Jersey reference, when Ray asks Egon what bizarre warped dimension are these spirits from, and Egon replies, possibly New Jersey, which is just a great gag. Richard Mueller himself actually grew up in New Jersey, so I guess it's one of those things where he gets a pass. Great moment here with Peter's dad in the speedboat. We obviously didn't see him end up in the New Jersey parallelogram, but yeah, it happened. Not going to be able to con my way out of this. Great animation and timing coming up. The music, everything on this scene, fantastic.
Torpedo, left side!
Torpedo, left side! Oh, it's so good. The drama, the tension. And we get a wonderful close-up of Winston just before he ducks. Duck, Winston! There he goes. The beautiful thing about this explanation that Egon is about to give, as to explain this dimension they find themselves in, it's perfectly written.
Well, can you imagine folding yourself?
I guess so.
Do you know what origami is?
Egon, you little maniac. Are you saying that this place folds reality?
Actually, it crumbles it up.
I just love how simple and logical an explanation that is, because we can imagine a dimension folding itself, or as he puts it, crumpling itself up. No two lines interact. Thus these missiles that have been fired by ships many, many years ago that ended up in this dimension are just endlessly flying around but never making contact with anything, because everything in this dimension follows its own separate line. Ron Gans is the uncredited guest voice actor in this episode, voicing Captain Koenig. That's the name of the captain with the glasses that accompanies the Ghostbusters into the dimension. With regards to the aforementioned call sheets, I should mention that eventually, and it did take me a while, I scanned them all and shared them with the Ghostbusters community, because, well, that's all I've ever done in every community. Get that sacred material and share it with as many people as possible. It's quite funny when you think about it. The rescue mission is a fairly easy one, at least initially. They go into the dimension, soon make sense of it. Egon turns the PKE meter into a meter that registers life, and they quickly find the MS Applegon. And with Egon's expert guidance, they manage to tow it back to reality. I love the victory music in this episode as well, which, if memory serves me correctly, does show up in one of the other syndicated episodes. It's frustratingly the title of which is on the tip of my tongue, and I can't quite remember it. I love everybody cheering, the men still in their ghost repellers, which did absolutely nothing. Oh, now they're not wearing them, so obviously they came off very quickly. This moment is really well staged, with Peter realising his father is missing. Even though Peter is fully aware that his father is a nuisance, he fears that he's in danger and knows that they must enter the other reality and rescue him. This two-shot of Egon and Peter is fantastic, with Peter in close-up. It lends itself to a very kind of serious moment in the episode. The moments of silence work really well in this episode. There are quite a few, but this particular one of Peter just looking down, making that decision. It's almost like a slight comical cut, with the Ghostbusters just effortlessly ending up in the New Jersey parallelogram again. It's just, yep, here we are again. The animation in these next few sequences is really quite striking. There's some real anime-esque takes. So we get the battleship Bismarck fly overhead, inexplicably firing its cannons at the Ghostbusters in their little speedboat. But watch this moment when Peter yells behind Egon and Ray and Winston. It's so bizarre.
Sorry. Look! Over there!
He shouts, they all scream, but then he apologises. It's so random, but the animation is gorgeous. And here, look, all very stylised sequences coming up. Watch this bit where Peter calls Egon an idiot. Like, Peter's face is pure anime. With the blinks as well, the timing, it's just wonderful to watch. I always love this little exchange. It's kind of a throwaway moment, but the Ghostbusters kind of get to their feet. I love Peter's line in the animation.
I think I broke something.
I think I broke everything.
I think I broke everything. So yeah, in this scene we hear the Ghostbusters theme song playing. Now, this may be strange to a few people, and you ask why? Well, let me explain. When released on home video by Magic Window, they replaced the Ghostbusters theme in these particular scenes with pieces of music from the group Tahiti. Tahiti were a group that performed music for the Real Ghostbusters soundtrack. The music was featured in pretty much every episode of the first ABC season. Thinking about it, it was very unusual for a cartoon to have a bunch of songs written for it. My guess is because the original movie had such a strong soundtrack, the producers of the cartoon felt that the show should also have songs play every once in a while. Anyway, as I waffle away, yeah, here in this scene we've just seen, instead of Tahiti's hometown hero, we have the Ghostbusters theme song instead. Again, I'll go back to what I said about the previous scene when they rescued the MS Applegon. The Ghostbusters perform their mission with very little effort, to be honest. They track down the MS Applegon with the use of the PKE meter, and here they save Peter's father with some tried and true ghostbusting. It doesn't seem to be too much of a job for them. But I think that's the beauty of the episode. Quite a lot happens, and there's a lot of character work as well, with Peter, obviously, and his father, and the Ghostbusters escape. Great animation on the sequence of the boat escaping the New Jersey parallelogram. If you listen to Ray's line here, there's definitely an edit in the dialogue. When you look at the mouth, it actually makes more sense for him to say, well, look at it this way, we're the first 4 guys, instead of, well, look, we're the first 4 guys. There's an edit after the word look.
What a waste. If only we could have studied it.
Well, look, we're the first 4 guys to ever single-handedly destroy a wonder of the unnatural world.
And yeah, the New Jersey parallelogram is destroyed, which is a shame. And Peter hoping that his father will now go straight. Look at Peter's father's individual teeth, like I pointed out. So yeah, thank you to Richard Mueller for writing this episode. And one day we fans will figure out which animation studio produced this episode. I'd love to know, because there's such a variety of styles going on throughout. Peter gets a postcard from Northern Alaska from his father. That will be followed up in Cold Cash and Hot Water. This final scene is just wonderful. Some of my favourite moments in the series were just the downtime when we'd see the characters just hanging around at the firehouse, because that would often show the strength of the writing, in the sense that as a writer you'd have to make the characters interesting outside of the episode's plot or premise. How do these characters interact? And I think Richard Mueller, as I said before, alongside Straczynski and Reeves, was one of those writers that just understood these characters so well. And yeah, this is one of my favourite episodes. I mean, that said, the syndicated season has so many of my favourite episodes. Heck, the first season, the ABC season, and the syndicated season are, I will argue all day long, some of the best writing in 1980s animation. And that's the end of this episode commentary. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please be sure to like, share and subscribe, and I'll catch you on the next one.